Hi, I'm Adam Zonder, the production manager for the Hangar Theatre Company, and welcome to another episode of In Good Spirits. As we have gone virtual for the 2020 summer season and everyone is working from home, currently I'm sitting in an empty theater, which is very odd considering it is the summertime. However, between the ongoing pandemic and this being my 25th season with the Hangar, we thought having some conversations with the various designers and technicians with whom I have worked over the years would be fun and in good spirits. I'd like to take a moment to give a big thank you to our series sponsor, Meyer Farm Distillers, located in Ovid, New York. Joe and his team produce various award-winning vodkas, gins, and my personal favorite, bourbons. Please check them out at meyerfarmdistillers.com. Today's conversation is with Shayla Roland, an events manager. How are you today, Shayla?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is great. So you've had a varied career from stage manager to administrator to producer. So let's start at the beginning. How'd you get into theater?
That's a really great story. So I fell into theater in college. So it was not something that I had any previous experience with. One of my dorm mates, my first year, loved theater and wanted to audition for the fall musical. And I was like, sure, I'll go with you. I'll audition, but then we can go play basketball or we can go to dinner, right? So I went just with him. I had seen Rent that summer, so I was like, yeah, I know a song. And so I went and I auditioned just to kind of get it over with, and we both got called back. He actually decided to do show choir instead, and I just wasn't that coordinated, but I'm really good at following instructions. So when they were like, so are you gonna stay? I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll stay. And I went through the callback, and I was cast in Bat Boy the Musical, which is a very strange show to kind of come into theater with.
Yes.
But ultimately, I really enjoyed the experience. And during the run, I was backstage, with the stage management team, and I would always ask, well, can I move that? Can I move that for you? Can I put that over there for you if that's where it needs to go? And that's kind of where I learned that that's where I felt most at home, was kind of being backstage and kind of setting everybody else up for success. So I went on to study theater in college, and I kind of focused in stage management.
Great. What did you go to college originally to study then?
I went to college originally to study psychology. So after I kind of did Bat Boy and realized that I really wanted to kind of go all in on the theater thing, I looked at all the requirements for psychology and theater, realized I could do them both in 4 years, and just decided to double major. So
Great. So your summer with us was in 2008. You were a stage management intern here. Do you remember what shows you worked on that summer?
I think it was 2009.
2009?
Yeah, because I graduated in 2010. Mm-hmm.
Got it.
I worked on, I was part of the lab. I stage managed, I think, 2 shows in the lab. One was about superheroes, but I cannot remember the name, but it was Origin Story is what it was called. I remember that one. And I think Bokkai was the other one that I did for the lab. And then I ASM'd Betrayal on the main stage. And then I also ASM'd The Mystery of Edwin Drood for kids stuff as well.
Great. Was that a fun time?
Oh, it was a great time. It was coming to Hangar was my kind of tester to figure out if this is something that I wanted to do professionally and kind of really go all into after I graduated. And I had a great time and met some great people, and it reaffirmed what I kind of wanted to start my career doing when I graduated. And I think working in those particular spaces, I think the lab where the stage manager you are the stage manager, so you're kind of in charge of everything, really helped solidify my confidence and my skills, and knowing that I could survive outside of an academic atmosphere. So it was great.
That's great. That's fantastic. So after that summer, you finished up college and graduated, and then you went to work at Ford's Theater, still in stage management.
Yes.
So what was that like, working at that rather large theater?
It was definitely a switch up from Hangar and from school. I was lucky where actually one of my professors at University of Mary Washington was actually a PSM at Ford's. So the knowledge that I had, he knew and was willing to push us even further as we were dealing with, multiple actors and a union crew. and what we could and couldn't do as stage management, and really having the weight of a show on your shoulders if you're like running, stage left or stage right, and kind of dealing with communication. So it was a very different experience, but I did that for about 2 years, and I grew a lot. The first year, you're kind of you're the second PA, so you're really in the learning mode, and then that second year, you are given way more responsibility and in charge of training somebody else. So it's a great way to learn and to kind of move forward.
Great. And then after a couple of years in stage management, you started to move into administrative management and producing at both Ford's and other places in the DC area. What was the draw for the change?
The draw for the change was that I realized that I wanted to change in schedule. Stage managers, during the rehearsal process, if it's during the day, you're there, and then it switches to being evenings and weekends as you run the show, which is great. But I didn't always get notice, for big life events in time to really try to get time off. So like weddings or somebody's baby shower or things like that. And I was kind of missing that. I was still in my young 20s. So I really wanted to kind of switch that up and kind of see what else is out there. I originally decided that I was just going to leave theater altogether and go into events, which you got there eventually. But I came back when Ford's needed just a little bit of help kind of doing some logistics and managing people for a particular program. And then that grew into a full-time position with the organization.
That's great. And had you really done any administrative work prior to that?
No, I had not. But I think there's something with theater in general, but also with stage management, where you just gain so many skills. A lot of stage management is just communication and just keeping a tight handle on information and schedules, and also people's kind of personal information as well, because you're holding the people and you're also holding the actor, and you're holding the director. So you have a tabs on everything, and you just want to make things move forward. As I went into the offices, it was definitely different. I sat at a desk and I had a computer and there were other people, and it was maybe a little quieter than like working in a rehearsal room. But, my goals were still the same. Like I had an outcome, and I was communicating with different people. It was a really outward facing position, dealing with, panelists and people who were coming in. So that aspect that you got from theater in terms of just being open to people and just showing them that you're there for them, even if you've only known them for 5 minutes. And that kind of getting that confidence was, it's kind of rooted in you already. And the rest of it is just, sheer drive and the desire to learn. And that definitely kept me going forward.
Great. And then after that, you ran off to Minnesota.
I did.
And became the associate producer for the Penumbra Theatre Company. Did I actually say that right? Penumbra?
Penumbra, yeah, you did. You did right.
Great. Can you tell us about your time there and what an associate producer does?
Yes. So I was in Minnesota for a little under 2.5 years. And for me in that particular position in that institution, associate producer was a new role. So it was something that I was definitely like creating as I was there, which is something I've done before and something that I do enjoy doing. So for me, the associate producer served to elevate and execute the artistic director's vision. So where are we going as a company? And then what are the different aspects that I either have my hands in or ways that I can move us there? So whether it's, helping with season planning in terms of what kind of shows we're looking for, what stories we're trying to tell to our audiences and also uplift our community. What education aspects do we want to kind of talk about when it comes to, building technicians. Penumbra is a theater of color. So it's a predominantly it's African-American theater. It's got a 40-year history. So what do we do to kind of give back to our community and also raise theater makers that look like us? Because there are not as many of us in the theater community as a whole. So what can we do for that? As well as there's a civic engagement arm. So how do we kind of bring our ethics kind of out into the community and lift other people up? It is just traditional theater. So season planning, casting is what I was doing. Kind of hold conversations about the art that we were putting on stage and communicating with our audiences and giving them background. but also kind of giving back to the community and welcoming people into our space as much as humanly possible. So it kind of held a lot of different aspects, but all for the service of the artistic director's dream and vision for the organization moving forward.
So was the company doing new plays or traditional works or some combination?
It was combination. So, typically it feels like we would start off with a classic. They did Black Nativity every year. So it's a holiday show kind of focusing on Langston Hughes's his poetry about the Black Nativity. And then we would do kind of more newer work in the spring, in like the winter, so January, February, and in the spring. So it kind of ran the gamut. And some of it was commissioned work. And some of it was, new playwrights that we've been connecting with and been doing some of their work, for a couple years. So it ran the gamut, but it just kind of wanted to give an overview of the African-American experience.
Great. And was it mostly people in St. Paul, or was it, were people brought in from outside? Like actors,
it was
designers?
It was a good mix of both. We definitely had a lot of designers and cast who were local to the Twin Cities, so Minneapolis and St. Paul. But on occasion, we would bring in actors from out of town or designers from out of town, but not. It was mostly local. If you kind of looked at a breakdown, it was mostly local, and we like to keep with the local folks. But every now and then, you'd go out of town for a particular role, or a particular designer works well with a particular director, and you kind of want to maintain that relationship.
Great. And when you took this position, it's obviously got a title of associate producer. What was the draw to leave the DC area, which I know is where you're from?
Yes. The big draw to leave the DC area was as much as I enjoyed my time at Ford's. I was there for, I think, a total of like 6 years. And it was time to kind of move on, but I wasn't finding a theater space to move on in DC. And I think I also was ready for more responsibility. And sometimes you just got to go and find and seek that out and see where that comes from. I had attended the TCG Theater Communications Group annual conference the summer before I went to Minnesota, and I had just met so many wonderful people, and some of them were based in the Twin Cities, and they were like, "You should totally come visit and check us out." So I did. I visited. I decided that I really liked the town and I liked the theater community, and I wanted to try my hand at living there and being an adult there, since I'd only been an adult in the place where I kind of grew up. So I wanted to be an adult somewhere else, and give that a go and invest in that community. So that's kind of why it was time to move. And it was a move up. It was a title change. It was more responsibility, more say and kind of what was happening in the theater. And I was ready for that challenge.
That's great. And then in 2019, you returned to the DC area and became the events manager at President Lincoln's Cottage. So let's start with, what is that position?
So the events manager, kind of as it says, I kind of manage the different venues that we have, and I communicate with clients from their inquiries to their bookings of their events in our spaces to execution. So on their day of, dealing with vendors, dealing with the client and their guests, and just make sure that they have a smooth event all around, and then like the cleanup. And
is
then
it mainly like weddings and receptions and things?
There are definitely a lot of weddings. Like wedding season is prime. So like, April, May, early June, and like September, October, early November are just full of weddings. But it's also corporate events, so meetings and retreats. There's also corporate dinners. If you're doing, we try to work with the convention center. So if people are coming in for a convention, people might want to take their particular stakeholders or their board members for an evening in DC. And the Cottage is not on your typical places where you'd go. It's a very unique look at DC. It's a very unique look at Lincoln and kind of how he lived, how he spent his summers. And the Cottage is where he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation. So people get to be in those spaces and kind of feel that.
That's fantastic. Um, so other than this really great position, is that what drew you back to the DC area?
No, I came back. Ultimately, I had to do with family. Like, I went to Minnesota. I was happy I went. I was an adult in another place, and I did very well. But my parents are here. Some of my siblings are here. Um, and so I wanted to kind of be back and be close to them before my parents decided to retire and move to like Florida. I was like, I need to see you guys first before you decide to go across the other country. And then I have, a lot of my family's kind of spread out. So being in Minnesota, it was just, every time I wanted to see somebody, I had to hop on a plane, and
Right.
it kind of gets tiring to have to do that. So I really wanted to be in a place where there were people that I could easily just drive to, and then I could go from there. So ultimately I came back for family.
Great. So what are some of the more interesting events that you've dealt with at Lincoln's Cottage?
Um, at the cottage, it's been a lot. It's definitely been a lot of weddings. So I came into it, and fall 2019 was my first wedding fall, but I think I did 16 weddings.
Wow.
Right? And it felt like that. Let me tell you, it felt like that. So we got to like mid-November, and I was like, I haven't seen my house on a Saturday in months. So it was just, it's a whirlwind. It's a whole different world. And, we're used to working hard in theater. But that was just something very different. I will say that but at the cottage, things seem to be more standard. I will say that my most exciting and most accomplished event to date actually happened when I was at Ford's Theater, and we had the 150th anniversary of the Lincoln assassination during my time. It was a 36-hour event, kind of starting in the evening of the 14th, or the day of the 14th, and going into the morning of the 15th. And I worked on that for about 18 months, just doing
Wow.
research. I amassed 100 living historians, so folks who dress in like 1865 period clothing to provide atmosphere throughout the whole period. We did a special commemoration event in the theater, and I worked with the National Portrait Gallery to have an overflow space. We did a commemoration, a wreath laying the morning of that Lincoln passed away, so at 7/22. And we had a lot of just great folks with us. James Swanson, who's an author. David Selby was there to read a poem. We worked with the Department of the Interior. The Secretary of the Interior was there. It was a truly remarkable experience. I had 40 sailors from the USS Abraham Lincoln show up at 4:00 in the morning.
There we go.
Are you there? Yeah. Sorry, that was weird. Show up at 4:00 in the morning, and I got like an hour of sleep, and I was up the next morning, and I was getting them ready for the event. But it went off. It went very, very well. Nothing went off without a hitch, but I think it went very, very well. And for all of the people who had followed the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, that was definitely a culminating event. And we had, I think a total, maybe 4,000 people come and be on 10th Street with us. And so it was pretty amazing.
That sounds fantastic.
That's the thing. That's probably one of the things that I am the most proud of in my career.
And well deserved, sounds like. But all, managing and arranging for those events is obviously very similar to stage management, just on a slightly larger scale.
Correct.
So, all of the skills that you learned as a stage manager certainly translate to all of what you're doing now. So that all works out well. So with the current pandemic and essentially all live arts events shut down, people have taken a moment, and a large number of institutional theater and performing arts issues have received a great amount of publicity. As a BIPOC arts administrator, how do you think the arts should change to be more accommodating and welcoming?
I think that there are, I want to point out those folks who have been kind of doing this work for years. There is, if you haven't seen it, there's the We See You White American Theater kind of movement that kind of, they came together to put together a 30-page document of the ways that organizations can kind of break down some of the systems that have kept people of color and Black folks outside of that system. And I think I think kind of looking at those and organizations really listening and trying to adhere to those, it would be definitely a step in the right direction. I know, I think Baltimore Center Stage has like announced that there's a few of those points that they are already starting to institute in their organization, and just more folks following along. I also think that while I was saying this earlier, there are Black and people of color artists and administrators, designers. I do still think that there's a pipeline issue, like in terms of getting that sort of education, getting that sort of exposure to young folks. So really looking at kind of the root of the issue in some cases and trying to find ways to bring more of those folks into the fold so that they can learn that there's more to theater than necessarily being on stage, to get some of them creating and doing the design work and the producing work and the admin work. That way it's not just we're seeing Black and Indigenous and people of color on stage, but we're knowing that those stories are coming from people who've lived those experiences. And, I'm really curious to see what people do. I think, we'll see the next few seasons where there'll definitely be more diversity kind of on stage and backstage and probably in admin offices. But in 5 years, I want to see that same commitment. And that's the kind of question that I'm kind of wrestling with. And that's what when I talk to people, I'm like, that's where I know you put your money where your mouth is.
Right. As long as it is long lasting and not
long lasting. This is not it's not a panacea. It's not just for, the temporary solution, just so you can say that you've done it, but are you really investing in it? And in those organizations that do, race work and kind of talk to staff members and really get them to understand their implicit bias and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. I wholeheartedly agree. And clearly a stage management pipeline works.
Oh my gosh, yes.
More specifically, based on the pandemic, where do you think arts might be heading since, we can't be near each other currently?
Because we can't be together. Everybody's like even at Hangry, everybody's moved to doing more virtual events, more digital streaming. I've seen some folks bring back the drive-ins or the drive-in movies. I think also Alliance just announced today that they're doing some drive-in kind of theater as well as a streaming site. So kind of what it sounds to be is more kind of like the Netflix and the Hulus. I think people are just going to find more creative ways to get their information out there. And I think we'll also see just smaller shows. I do think we'll see live theater again. I think it will be, a 4-person show or a 2-person show. And clearly it's going to be a lot of social distancing when it comes to audience members. 1 acts versus 2 acts where there's less chance of people kind of mingling in restrooms and snacks and all of that kind of stuff. So I think it'll be kind of a mix of both. But at this point, we're all just kind of guessing to figure out not only what, but when any of these things can happen as COVID continues to kind of rear its ugly head again, and move its way back through the country. Yeah,
unfortunately. Roughly how many events have you had to, either cancel or reschedule?
Oh man. I would say at least 20, probably more. Spring, of course, was hit the hardest just because it came out of nowhere. And it was just gearing up, not only for wedding season, but we also had a lot of corporate dinners and things like that just had to be postponed. And then, of course, we've hit the fall where we've had, fall weddings have also had to kind of either postpone or cancel. So I would say at least 20, but probably maybe around 30-ish.
Roughly how far out right now are you either rescheduling or canceling?
Through the year. I think the last thing that I just postponed was early November. Mm-hmm. So, events we're still looking at, elopements and micro weddings, things that are 10 people or 25 people social distance. But your large scale ones have, they just can't exist right now.
Right. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Shayla. I'd like to once again thank our sponsor, Meyer Farm Distillers. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see you again and to see the hangar.
You too.